Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 150 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. Listen to every episode on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Diane S., originally released August 18th, 2021. Diane has been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous since December of 1996. My guest on today's podcast is my friend Diane S., whom I haven't seen in person for at least 2 years. But our friendship goes back much further than that. Diane's story is wrought from a difficult childhood in which being the youngest of 4 meant being largely ignored by her parents, especially when her father was drinking. His alcoholism also fed a mean streak that landed hard on her family, with verbal abuse and derision often aimed at Diane. As a teenager, she found alcohol as a way to escape, and her drinking followed her into 4 booze-soaked years in the Air Force. At age 22, she met and married the father of her 2 children with high hopes of a happy marriage. She dreamed he would support and encourage her pursuit of a career as an attorney. But her continued drinking and lack of support from her husband resulted in her filing for divorce after a rocky 10-year marriage. On her own with 2 kids to raise in the midst of escalating alcohol use, Diane somehow managed to work as a paralegal and also attend law school in the evenings. Through God-given talent and the tenacity of a functional alcoholic, Diane's career as a lawyer took shape. Unfortunately, as her drinking increased, so did her alcoholic behavior. The subsequent years took their toll until she hit the wall shortly after Christmas in 1996. With little knowledge of AA, her chance encounter with a woman in the program led Diane to her first AA meetings and onto the road of recovery. Diane's is a classic AA success story of full immersion in the program. She got a sponsor, worked the steps, went to lots of meetings, and sponsored women along the way. But the greatest enrichment of her life, via service work, took the form of helping others find sobriety through her work as an attorney in the civil and family court systems. Laying her own personal anonymity aside, Diane has become an ambassador for sobriety by helping clients and their families find treatment alternatives. As importantly, she also imparts her knowledge, understanding, and first-hand experience to other attorneys and judges throughout the family court system. She's also passionately involved in a lawyer assistance program that helps those with substance abuse find the right solutions. Diane's selfless and successful work in recovery, both within AA and in the legal system, demonstrate the overall quality of a solid program. I'm grateful to be her friend and am impressed by her efforts in helping others. I think you'll be impressed too as you spend the next hour and 10 minutes with my friend and AA sister, Diane S.
My name's Diane, and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Diane. That's what I say in response in a meeting when someone says that. I am so glad to see you. I haven't seen you in person in probably the last at least 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. You and I used to see each other all the time when we were on the board.
We did.
And
Yes.
I had the opportunity to work on some projects together with regard to the court and that sort of thing. And it worked out pretty well, I thought.
It did.
It's so good to see you.
Thank you.
Have you been busy over the last couple of years with recovery? And
I have.
what have you been up to?
Well, with recovery, it's the usual meetings, friends, fellowship. But also because I'm very open about my sobriety with my colleagues in the family courts and the judges. I get called on a lot to make recommendations for treatment, or a mediator will call and say, we have this issue. What do you suggest as a solution so this guy or girl can see their children, that sort of thing. So I love that part of it. And being open doesn't put any additional pressure on me. It just allows me an opportunity to provide service. And then I also serve on the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, which is the program for attorneys that struggle with addiction and mental health issues. And so we do a lot of good work through there. There's a ton of good work through TLAB.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. In fact, I've had some interactions with them in the past as well. And I do want to talk to you a little bit more about that later. How long have you been sober now?
It'll be 25 years on December 27th of this year.
25 years. Okay, so you're
24 and a half.
Yeah, that's cool. I do the same thing. I always say how long I've been sober by the next sobriety birthday.
I know it's not cool in some circles, but it's okay.
We're kind of picky in one of the men's meetings I go to. If a man gets up to try and get a chip even a day before his birthday, we'll tell him to sit down and come back the next week. That's the way that we do things. Okay, so right after Christmas in 1996, you decided to get sober. Can I assume that Christmas that year wasn't that great?
No, the month of December was not that great.
Really?
But it was a lot leading up to it. It wasn't this moment of clarity. It was a slow, low crawl. And then I crossed paths with a woman at a Kroger video counter. And one thing led to another. We had a conversation and I picked up a Desire chip the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool story.
Well, so at that point, did you know you needed help and you were just waiting for it to arrive, or
yes,
what led up to that?
I never drank normally, Howard. I wasn't one of those that eased on into this disease. I drank to get drunk. I drank to get drunk from the first time. And mostly because my first drunk was a throwing up in the bushes drunk at a beer hall. And I finally felt like I was somebody. I finally felt like I had arrived.
After you threw up or before you threw up?
While I was throwing up, believe it or not, I'm like, I am totally cool now. I am somebody.
Is that what you had expected, to drink and throw up?
No, but I was prolific at it. You were blacking out and throwing up. Yeah.
Was that as a kid that happened to you, or
17? Yeah. My father was an alcoholic and he died of the disease at 56. So I wasn't going to be him. I wasn't going to smoke. I wasn't going to drink. I did it all. And I was the party girl drunk. You know, I was the one that danced on the tables. Was the only way that I thought anybody would like me.
I'm curious because I've had a number of people on the show I've interviewed whose parents or parent, one or the other, was an alcoholic, some who never got sober, some who died drunk, and they made the same statement that they swore to themselves that they would never get that way, and yet they got that way. Why do you think that is? I mean, with everything that we know, why do you think that we end up like our parents, even though we're trying so hard not to?
In my case, I don't think I knew any different. I knew I didn't want to be. My dad had a comb over, and it was only a few years ago that I actually acknowledged the fact that he had a comb over. And when he got drunk, his hair fell in his face. And we would laugh at him, telling him his hair was in his face, watching him try to push his hair back. Now, that was the fun time. That was the fun time. As my father's drinking progressed, I'm the youngest of four, so I'm the last one home. And as his drinking progressed, he just became mean. You just mean. Yeah. There were moments of meanness, but it was just consistently mean. And he drank at home. He would drink until he passed out at the dining room table. And before I went to sleep every night, I had to make sure that he didn't have a lit cigarette somewhere. He had a lot of issues. He never, ever admitted it. He got very sick at a young age. Pancreatitis nearly killed him from the drinking. And he had everything under the sun and was on disability by his late 40s.
So he was in pain for a lot of years, wasn't he?
He was. And after the alcohol was gone, when he couldn't drink it anymore, his system couldn't process it, he turned to narcotics. And this was in the 70s when there was no accountability for those narcotics. If he called the doctor's office and said, I need more 10 days into a 30-day prescription, they just to shut him up would give him another one. So it became problematic. And so he had to be detoxed once a year. He had every issue under the sun. And he was a very tall, strong, attractive man. And he just wasted away to nothing.
Oh, that's sad. That's really sad.
Yeah.
And to have to watch that as a kid. You have siblings?
three older siblings. I have two sisters and a brother that are older than me.
Okay, so you were the baby of the family.
I was the baby.
How about the ages there? What was the differential?
My brother's 3 years older than me, then 4, then 5. So there were 4 kids born in 5 years, a good Catholic family.
Was his behavior when he was drunk, was it experienced by the three of them, or were they already out of the house?
My sisters didn't experience the alcoholism. My brother left for the military, but to hear them tell their stories, I don't know how much of their true. My oldest sister has nothing bad to say about my dad. The two middles, my brother is a mess. He's a train wreck. My sister's a train wreck.
All from alcoholism?
No, they did not. My brother was a crystal meth addict for a long time.
Oh, my.
And he lived on the streets and he lived in shelters and he was very transient. And he's 64 in a few days and has all kinds of medical issues. He's one breath away from death. And, Vegas was putting odds on it. I wouldn't have given him till 50. And he's got a hard heart and he blames my dad for a lot of things. And I don't know if that's justified, but that's his story to tell.
Yeah.
I know that for me, I was the last one left there and it was absolute living hell.
Yeah.
And my parents stayed married till my father passed away.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been really difficult.
When I say he was mean, he just had hurtful things to say. And that didn't start till later. So my dad was the fun drunk for most of the years. He was a softie. My mom was the disciplinarian. Nothing extreme. Just
I see.
She had her rules, and my God, we had to follow them. And we were held accountable. But there was never any physical abuse. There was never any of that in our household. And it's hard to say, Howard, if it was generational or not. And I will give him credit for a lot of things. I will give him credit for understanding each of our potentials, right? I was the ski smart kid, so I was expected to get all A's. And when I fell short, I was held accountable. My middle sister was a C student and he was fine with that. And then my oldest sister, she actually broke his heart when she got pregnant in high school.
Oh, dear.
That was a turning point in our family. And I would never say that to her. Never, ever. But I think that was a real turning point in my dad because that was daddy's girl. And that was never supposed to happen.
Your brother, did you say he went off to join the service?
Yeah, he went in the Army and that was the last steady job he had. He got out when he was 21, 22, and settled in Colorado Springs, got married, had a couple of kids, very abusive to his son. And they got divorced and he never worked after that. Had a bad crystal meth problem, drinking marijuana.
Wow.
And so we never really knew what was going on with him. But he would call my mom at like when he was in jail or down on his luck. And my mom would just get so upset. The last time that it happened, she ends up in the emergency room. So us girls made a commitment that we would take care of my brother as long as my mom was alive. So we did, and we tried. And he's a victim. He's a very difficult human being to like for me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I love him. He's my brother, and I wish things were different, but he's just angry.
Yeah.
He's just angry at everybody and everything.
Sounds real similar to my brother. That's almost the identical relationship. And I haven't talked to him in almost 40 years, and that's by his choice, but to divorce the family, which was a devastating thing to my parents. So you were in this difficult home situation with your dad. What was the family like in public? Did your mom strive to make things look okay?
Absolutely. The family drank a lot. They didn't know when my dad made that turn from being the fun drunk to being just a drunk. They didn't do much after that. Life kind of stopped. And my mom had to continue working so that they had medical insurance, and they were broke most of the time. And it was, my mom was so afraid of being left alone, she wouldn't leave my father. And then he just got too sick that she couldn't leave. And she wouldn't, she just felt responsible. And I believe they were each other's truest love. I believe that. But it just wasn't, for her at the end, it was just, she never knew what she was coming home to every evening from work.
Yeah. How old were you when you first started to notice things about your parents' marriage?
I was probably early teens, maybe preteen, early teens, because I was the youngest and there was 3 years between me and my brother. I spent a lot of time with my mother, and it would be the consensus would be I was her favorite. There's no doubt. And I'm not saying that into arrogance. It was just happenstance, right? And I was a really good child. But she started making comments about his drinking, and we cried a lot together talking about my dad. And that was early on. She was very open with me about things. And I don't know that that's okay. I really don't know that that's okay. I don't know that it's not okay. I don't know.
So you were her confidant, so to speak, at that point?
Yes. Yeah. And nobody else
Yeah.
knew, really. I don't think anybody else knew, because despite being pretty poor as a family, she made it look really good. She made it look really good. We always had what we needed. We never expected anything more than what we needed.
Yeah. That must have been pretty tough for you as a kid, though, knowing the way things really were, but having to keep up an appearance that your mom wanted the family to have to the rest of the world.
Yeah. And, there were a lot of things as the youngest that I missed out on because of it. Like when I got confirmed at the church, my parents didn't come because they were at an open house for my brother at the high school. And then I think they were tired too. With 4 kids in 5 years, they might have just been tired. It's hard to say. But then in high school, I was on the debate team, never had parties. Everybody would rotate hosting the parties after the tournaments. And I did not host a party at my house. I hosted it at my sister's house because you never knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated from high school, I saw my mom show up at the fence, and I saw my dad walk up a little bit later, and I knew he was drunk, and I was out on the football field, but I knew he was drunk, and I was like, I don't even want him there. And there was nobody else there to cheer for me except my brother-in-law's little brother was graduating, so they cheered, but that was all I had. And and I think some of it really was Howard. They were tired. They were just really tired. Their goal was to get 4 kids through high school. Yeah.
It's still heartbreaking, though. I mean, to have to go to an important event like a confirmation without your folks there, and having to go to your own graduation and have to try and find a way that it was okay that they weren't there. I mean, all that stuff is really tough. I know my parents were absent for a lot of things that I did too, and I was not on the debate team. I was on the speech team, but we hung out. We went to tournaments with the debaters. But I can't ever remember, maybe once or twice it ever happened that my parents ever came to a tournament that was in the town. And I mean, even for 5 minutes.
No, my parents never showed up to any of that. Never.
Yeah. And it's almost like I had to find a way to say, well, okay, they weren't there, but they must support me in it because they come and pick me up from school at late hours after we're done with the team. And they get up early on a Saturday morning to take us to the local tournament if necessary. But no, I can imagine it. It must have been heartbreaking for you too.
Yeah, it was. I was on an island. I felt like it was an island in my family. Yeah.
So you graduated from high school. You said you hadn't really had your first drink until you were behind a pool hall at 17.
Yes.
What did the next several years look like going through college and then law school with regard to your drinking and your partying?
I didn't do it that way.
Really?
I went to undergrad and law school at night later on. I left Toledo. I went in the military. It felt like my only option.
Okay.
So I spent 4 years in the military, and that was just a drinking binge. I mean, I drank with the best of them in the military, and we drank a lot. And it was the only way I felt comfortable, right?
Yeah.
It was, I didn't know it then.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was a problem. I really didn't know that I drank to get drunk. There was no frozen things in my future, right? Frozen drinks with umbrellas. And so it was in the military when I was stationed at Fort Hood that I met my kid's dad. And we drank a lot together, and we dated for a year. I got out of the military there at Fort Hood, and we got married there.
Was he military as well?
Yeah, he was a pilot. Actually went to flight school after we got married, but he was a mechanic, and We
Sure.
met, and he was tall and handsome, and he asked, it was just, there wasn't a whole lot of, we knew what our dreams were. He wanted to fly helicopters and I wanted to be a lawyer, and we shared each other's dreams.
Wow.
But he wasn't inclined to help me get to my dream, right? So we had our children. I had my son at 24 and my daughter at 27. I was 22 when we got married. And I'd stopped drinking for some time after my son was born. I did drink while I was pregnant with him, but I did not. After my son was born, he was very high maintenance, and I couldn't do it with the hangovers. I just couldn't. I couldn't have a hangover and take care of him. So, but it was a dry drunk. I mean, I was a bitch. It was.
Yeah. So you did that by your own willpower then, huh?
Yeah, I just white knuckled it. But after my daughter was born and the kids got mobile, and then it was game on. And if you want to know about the progressiveness of the disease, it was clearly evident there. Because once I picked up again, it was pretty bad. And but he was a drunk. My ex-husband was a drunk, and he died of this disease at the age of 53. So we struggled through our marriage for 10 years, and some of it was good, some of it was not. Some of it we just managed. He came from a horrible background of abuse and neglect, and he's the only successful one in his family. And he just couldn't open that Pandora's box. I mean, physical abuse he had been beaten by his father, who ironically was a police officer. His mother had told him that her sister tried to adopt him. And there's just a lot of things that he just never really came to terms with. And so during the marriage, the only thing that kept him from being violent with me was that I worked for family lawyers. I was a paralegal. And he felt like if he did that, I was going to clean him out. Not that there was a lot to clean out, believe me, but I was going to take him for everything. Yeah.
Okay, so you had your first child at 24, your second at 27. You got married at 22. Were you working during the time that your children were babies, or were you a stay-at-home mom?
No, I did not stay home. I don't think I'm cut out for that. Yeah. I worked as a legal secretary and a paralegal. And I had some great opportunities that were thrown my way. And I was very good at my job. I was very, very good at my job. And it's the career path that I wanted. And I always wanted to be a lawyer. Always, 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 always. And so I got my associate's degree as a paralegal. And everything I did was to develop my resume to get into law school. That was the ultimate goal.
I see.
So I was able to complete that. And when I decided when we quote decided that I was going to go get my undergraduate degree, it was miserable. It was miserable. He did not support anything I did. As a pilot, he did a year away from us, actually a year and a half away from us on an unaccompanied tour to Egypt. And then when he went off on another unaccompanied tour to Honduras, I folded. I said, I can't do it anymore. If I'm going to do it on my own, I'm not going to have to answer to him. And I filed for divorce. I did it the best way I could, but I was drinking a lot. I was going out. It was a crazy time. I did not have a good support system. When I got divorced, everything just my life was real messy. And I ended up filing bankruptcy in 1994, a year after our divorce. Because I was borrowing from credit cards to pay credit cards.
Wow.
And I thought I was Diamond Jim, flashing my credit card all over the place when I was drunk and writing hot checks and all of that. So, but by that time, I knew I had a problem. There was no doubt. Talked to a friend of mine, Lee P., right? He and I were talking one time, and I was telling him that in 1989, we had all gone from Colleen down to Houston to see the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Oilers play. And I got so wasted, I almost got kicked out of the Astrodome. And so that's hard work. That is hard work.
But so this is going on. You were married then for a total of 10 years?
10 years.
And then once you became divorced, were you sole custody of the kids, or was it joint? How did that work?
I was the primary custodial parent. And that was God's gift to me because that's what got me sober.
I see.
After we got divorced, he had, it was in 1995, I'd come to Houston for a seminar, met a guy, of course. I packed up my kids and everything I owned and moved us to Houston. That relationship didn't work. Not that I needed to even say that, but it was God's guiding hand to get me to Houston. And my drinking had really accelerated a lot. And I didn't want to have the reputation in Houston that I had in Killeen for being a drunk.
I see. Yeah.
And everybody, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like people thought I was a bad person.
Right.
But everybody up there knew each other. And so word got around. And so when I got to Houston, I didn't want to be that person anymore, Howard.
I get it.
To go back to my Houston Oilers story, we got home the next day and it was Christmas Eve. And I had to go to the grocery store to buy dinner. And I leaned over to tie my shoes and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely tie my shoes. And I remember thinking, this isn't normal. But it still took another 7 years to get there. But that's when the thought was planted in my brain. And so when I moved to Houston and this relationship fell apart, I made a choice not to drink. I said that I am so sad. I'm so depressed. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to get my act together.
So this was 1989 that happened?
Well, the 1989 was the football game, but I moved to Houston in 95.
So between 89 and 95, you were in Killeen?
I was in Killeen, yes.
There's a big Army base, isn't there? And they're in Killeen.
That's why we were there, yes.
I see. Okay. So you were drinking like crazy until you came down to Houston in 95.
Yeah.
And so how did you stop at that time?
I just made the choice that it probably wasn't a good idea till I got through this breakup. I don't know how I did it, but that's when I stopped for maybe 4 months. But then when I picked up in September, October timeframe, it didn't get bad immediately, but that December, I had an experience that I'll share with you. Driving down Woodway near St. Martin's Church. And it was a beautiful day. There was trees and there was an opening in the trees where I could see the sky. And I heard a voice tell me, if you keep this up, you're going to lose custody of your kids.
Wow.
And there had been several instances like just neglect, staying out longer, anger, rage, just so many things that I couldn't do it. I mean, I was just desperate and had a firm Christmas party.
Okay.
And my nephew says, firm Christmas parties don't count. It's a non-day. But I end up getting really, really drunk, leaving my kids with my son's friend's parents. And I drove out of Rice Village in a blackout, came out of the blackout at the stadium, nearly wrecked coming home. And I said, okay, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that anybody would have found my kids where they were to tell them. And that's when I started calling this club. Like every day I had the number up on my little corkboard at work. Okay, so when are your meetings? I would ask. And okay, what if I'm late? Can I bring my daughter? What, so do I sign in? And finally the guy was really exasperated with me. And he says, lady, just come to a meeting. But I didn't. I didn't have that courage at that moment. And then I had a good friend of mine whose family is a high profile Houston family. And they had a Christmas party. And I swore I wasn't going to drink. So I didn't drink before I left like I normally would. I waited when I got there and I wasn't going to drink. And then somebody walked up to the bar and I got a red wine and got to talking with some guys. And next thing you know, I'm coming out of a blackout and talking to a guy agreeing to do something. He was an attorney. And I joke around in meetings and I say, I don't know if I was agreeing to have an affair or do contract paralegal work. I don't know. So a woman that I grew up with, she lived next door to me and her daughter was best friend growing up. I used to travel with them. They had a boat. We go up into Canada for 2 weeks. I went to Disney World with them for a couple times. I was like her child and she was like my second mom. And I remember seeing her like drinking liquor. I always thought it was Listerine, but she really had a serious drinking problem. I didn't know. I was too young to really recognize that part of it. And in 1978, right before I went in the military, she told my mom and I that she had went to treatment and got sober. And then she had relapsed, but she got sober for the last time in 1983. And she was my second mother. I looked up to her so much, so much. And she talked about AA and how happy it made her. And I would see her every time I went home, and she just had a joy about her, a joy that was absent before.
She was there in Toledo going to meetings?
Yes.
When she was going and you were still there, did you ever go to a meeting with her or sit down and talk to her to find out more about AA?
No, I mean, she did not know that I had a problem because, Howard, I hid it from my family in Ohio.
Oh, okay.
If I went home, I might have a drink or a beer or something like that, but I refused to let myself get drunk in front of my family.
I see.
I really hid it well. She didn't know I had a problem, and she knew I liked to party, is what she told me, because she was my first phone call after my first meeting.
Okay.
I mean, she had a joy. That's what it was. I mean, she just had a joy. Yeah. And that's how I knew that this was my shot. I didn't really know about treatment. I didn't know about other opportunities or options. That's the only option I knew. And so that's where I went with it. And I knew I needed help. And so Christmas Day, I was up in Colleen with some friends. I didn't have my kids. And we all got really drunk on a bunch of different alcohol. And went by a friend's house, and there was a Mercedes out front. And we said, hey, let's go find out who owns a Mercedes. And because that's what drunk people do. And so we just busted in on their Christmas, right? And it was a woman, it was his daughter who lived in Houston. And we were talking, and I guess I was coherent, I suppose. But then I came back on the 26th to Houston, and I went to a movie, and to the country club was my last drink. And we went to the country club after the movie, and my friend left a half a glass of wine. And I just remember looking at it. I'm like, who does that? And then in my second thought was, Diane, that's not normal. And so the next day I was at work. I was working as a paralegal, and there was a guy in my firm that was sober, and he would make comments in the hall. And it was like, everybody knew I got trashed at the Christmas party. And I thought every time he said something, he was talking to me, la, la, la. And because it's all about me at that point. But
yeah, of course.
They let us go home early. So I ran from the building because I thought, if I don't run, they're going to ask me to go upstairs and have a drink with them, and then I'll never get home.
Okay.
So I ran from the building, went home, and then I decided my kids were coming in the next day. I was going to go to the grocery store. I was going to stop and have a drink, and then come home and get ready for their Christmas. So I get to the Kroger and buy my groceries. I go over to the video counter, and I'm talking to a couple women. One of them leaves. They convinced me to get another movie. We step outside. We start talking. She says, hey, let's go have coffee. So we go have coffee, and she tells me she's in AA. I burst into tears. So I asked, when's your next meeting? And she said, tomorrow. I was like, oh, hell, Diane, you got to do it, or now or never, baby. And so she gave me her phone number on a napkin. She drew a map over to the club, and she said, meet me there at 8:30. So I never went for that drink, and I went home, and I was so excited, because it was like, I think I may have found a solution. This may be a solution. And I was so excited. I barely slept. I was thinking to myself, I said, I'm going to do this AA thing tomorrow. Then I'm going to go next week. I'm going to find some courage. I'm going to go talk to Matt, and I'm going to find out how Matt stayed sober and all of this stuff. And so I get to the meeting the next day, and I'm having all these second thoughts as I'm pulling in. And I pull in, I walk in like I own the damn place. And I walk into the meeting room 1 at the old club. And there was the attorney, Matt, leading the meeting.
Wow.
And I said, hey, and he goes, hi, Diane. I said, hi, Matt. That was it. And so I get into the meeting. Susie shows up, I raise my hand for my first meeting, becomes a first step meeting. At the end, Matt says, he assures me, Diane, nobody will say anything, whatever you say here stays here, blah, 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 blah. I burst into tears and I was just hysterical. And so after the meeting, all these women, I call them the L's and the J's, they come up to me and they're pushing their numbers into my hand and they're crying.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could think of at that moment was, if you knew me, you wouldn't be doing this.
Isn't that something?
So that was my first meeting. That was my only desire, Chip. And I have been sober ever since.
So that's on December 27th.
1996.
Let me make sure I got the players correct here, okay? Now, Matt was another attorney. Was he in your firm at the time?
He was one of my superiors, yes.
And you knew he went to AA?
I did not know he went to AA. I knew he was sober.
So you didn't know he was in AA until you walk into your very first meeting, and he's sitting there leading the meeting?
Correct.
Okay, and the woman who met you there, Judy?
Susie M.
Oh, Susie. Okay. Is she the one who you met at the video?
Yes.
Okay. So isn't that something, these God moments for you kind of clumped together in a way that's allowed you to get and stay sober?
Yeah.
Wow. So what did you think when you got home after that?
Well, I got my kids and they were like, Mom, it looks like you've been crying. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm really good. And then I said, Mommy made a decision today that she's not going to drink today. And they were like, whatever. They were 9 and 12.
Yeah. Did they come down to Houston from Killeen on their own?
They were with their dad. He had the first half of Christmas. I had the second half of Christmas. So I had to meet their dad at a halfway point.
Now, when you did that, you were sober?
Yeah. I had just left the meeting. When I left that 8:30 meeting, I went and picked up my kids from their dad and they were coming home.
Did you talk to him at all during that exchange?
Absolutely not.
So you didn't let him know that you had been to AA at that point?
No way. That would have never set well.
Yeah. Why not?
Because it would have been me admitting to him that I had a drinking problem, and it would have opened the door in my mind, only in my mind, that he could get custody of the kids. And he knew that was the only way to hurt me.
Okay. Yeah. So I understand why you didn't say anything to him about that. Okay. So this holiday that you had with your kids must have been like no other in your life, huh?
Exactly. It really was. We spent, like, New Year's Eve was frozen pizzas and s'mores. It was all I could afford. And it was the best. We put together a bunch of blankets in the living room. We all slept in the living room. And yeah, it was really amazing. It was an amazing holiday, and I remember it very well.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So they got their mom back. Prior to this, Diane, to what extent did your kids, now 9 and 12 when you got sober, to what extent had they seen you drinking and drunk over the years? What was their frame of reference?
My son, he saw a lot and he remembers a lot. And he's just now starting to share some of that with me. He remembers the men that came in and out of our lives. He remembers hearing me throwing up in the sink one night when I came home. He remembers the parties. He remembers me drinking. He's not resentful about it. And he's older, and so he's less judgy. And it's like, Mom, you were single. It's like what you did, but whatever. My daughter only remembers what I called lazy days. Lazy days where Mom's laying in bed drinking whatever concoction she came up with to cure the hangover.
Lazy
Yes,
days, AKA hangover.
correct. Exactly. We called it lazy
Oh my
days.
gosh.
And we would watch like
That's
college
great.
football, like every college football game ever or whatever was on TV.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Um, yeah. And so she remembers lazy days, but she doesn't remember the drinking. She remembers a lot of my mistakes,
Uh-huh.
and she wishes some things had been different. She's done a lot of her own
Mm-hmm.
work. And so she feels comfortable sharing with me freely, but she also shares all the good things that I did too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. So your kids had the opportunity to some extent or another to have known the pre-sober Diane.
Yes.
When you were with them before getting sober, had you acknowledged the fact that you were drinking too much and adjusted your drinking when you were around them to not drink as much, or did that not affect your behavior?
I never shared anything about my drinking with them. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really able to put it in words, Howard.
I
It
see.
really wasn't
Yeah.
something it was something I knew, but I couldn't verbalize.
Did you cut back when you were around them?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't drink at home
Okay.
when I was out and about.
I see.
So, did I ever get drunk when they were around? Probably, but they were also getting older, and that was a fear. That was a big fear I had. I was leaving them longer and longer.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. So you went to your first meeting. What were your first 6 months or year like in AA?
I followed each and every rule that each person told me.
Hmm.
I went to probably 300 meetings in
Wow.
18 months. I got my sponsor within a couple weeks. I started working the steps. I started the
Uh-huh.
fellowship. I did have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship at 90 days, which was a huge mistake, but I've kind of felt I was unique.
The ladies would have told you not to do that, right?
They told me, yeah, of course, but
But then they let you do it and learn your own lessons, right?
yeah, and they didn't abandon me it didn't take me long to realize that he wasn't the one for me.
Was he in the program?
Oh, yeah, he had 18 years. Yeah. Classic,
Oh boy.
classic,
Oh,
classic.
he should have known better. Maybe you were on the cusp of knowing better, but he sure as hell should have known better, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's regrettable, probably. Yeah. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, during those first 6 months, my son made the choice to go live with his dad.
Full time.
Yes. And I let it happen.
Okay.
Everybody knew it was going to happen eventually because the dad, my ex, was setting it up. And
I see.
I swore before I got sober that I was never going to let that happen. Never, 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 never.
Yeah.
After I got sober and this happened, I decided that if my son had the courage to ask me, I had to have the courage to let him. And it lasted 3 years. And
Yeah.
but we were together all the time. Like I could commit to him at that point. Like he played baseball and he
Mm-hmm.
played some football. And I would leave work at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would drive up to Killeen where they lived. I would watch him play a
Mm-hmm.
doubleheader, get back in the car with my daughter, and drive back to Houston.
Mm.
I would go see him all the time on the weekends. He came down all the
Mm-hmm.
time. I
Mm-hmm.
would get him plane tickets to come
Sure.
down. I was very, very committed at that point, Howard. I really was. And I'm really
Yeah.
proud of how I handled it. I am proud of how he handled it. And I remember being able to say to him at one point, I know you didn't choose dad over me. And when I said that, he just let out this, like he had been holding his breath the whole time.
Mm.
And he thanked me for
Wow.
saying it. And I became, in my mind, a really, really, really good mother. I had people in
Yeah.
the program teach
Yeah.
me how to talk to my children and be a good mother. I had learned boundaries from my mom. I learned accountability from my mom. And my children will tell me today at 33 and 36 the things they remember me saying to them. My daughter had AA stuck all over her. So she calls me up now and she'll say, Mom, I've already looked at my side of the street, but I need some advice on this. Yeah, it's like they have all of the lingo. And
Yeah.
one of the women I knew who's since passed away, Nancy H., she told me, she says, Diane, if you can throw
Yeah.
money at the problem, it's not a problem. And my kids, who are very
Yeah.
financially secure, they believe in that. They know that
Yeah.
story and they know that philosophy.
Yeah.
And God has spoken to me so many times when I'm talking to my kids. But I became a really good mom.
Yeah.
Really good mom.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, what a turnaround from before, largely credited to the women in your life.
Absolutely. And they're still in my life. They're all still sober. All
Yeah,
three of those
that's
ladies,
so
they're
cool.
three women their names were
Uh-huh.
L and three were J. And I call them the L's and the J's. And I also, for several months after I got sober, probably 2 years,
Uh-huh.
once a month I would call
Yeah.
everybody because we didn't have email, we didn't have text message.
Right.
And
Uh-huh.
I would say, hey, we're all getting together on Tuesday at 6 o'clock. Come join us. And sometimes there were two people, sometimes there were 10,
Wow.
and we would
Wow.
just go out to dinner and do stuff. And I called two people every day because that's what I was told to do. And I
Yeah.
called, and it was really hard.
Yeah.
And when I had things happen, I called and I talked to people, and I went to meetings.
Right.
I remember my daughter one time, I was really having a rough evening or whatever. And she goes, "Can you just go to a meeting?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay.
So she knew. At what point do you remember sitting down with your kids and telling them about AA? Was that early on?
Um, by that time I had told them I'd stopped drinking and I wanted to stay stopped and I needed to go to meetings
Mm-hmm.
to do that. And so what
Okay.
happened is a lot of these people in the program became friends of my children. And my friend Roseanne from Toledo, I
Yeah.
called her 3 days after I got sober, and she came to visit frequently. We went to the AA Women's International Conference together, probably half a dozen times. And, I built a really solid foundation.
Yeah. So let's go back and just for a second,
Sure.
for the benefit of whoever happens to listen to this, you mentioned about getting into a relationship at 90 days with somebody who was sober for
Yes.
18 years. What was the outcome of that, and how did all that unfold?
Well, it is something that I think women in the program need to know, that there are men there that are preying
Okay.
on women, and
Uh-huh.
they're getting women
Yeah.
at their most vulnerable points, probably in their life, and they're taking advantage of them.
Right.
And they will justify
Uh-huh.
it that they want to help and they want to make sure. But
Right.
this particular person was very overbearing,
Uh-huh.
very, very odd,
Yeah.
and very
Uh-huh.
annoying. And
Hmm.
my kids did not like him.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of elbowed his way into our lives, and I didn't know what to do with that. I really
Hmm.
didn't. And relationships was not my strong suit.
Especially at 3 months of sobriety. I mean, goodness.
Right. And so he was doing what no one should have ever done to a new person in sobriety. And so it didn't last 3 months. Like, he was telling me how to raise my children, and he had a daughter that he hardly ever spoke with. And he
Mm-hmm.
tried to, tell me what to do with my kids and how to do it. And my son was going to end up in jail if I didn't get him into therapy, and just
Hmm.
all these awful, awful things. And
Wow.
my son is an amazing man. And that was
Yeah.
far from the
Uh-huh.
truth. And it was one of those things it was the first time in my life that I really depended on prayer and
Uh-huh.
asking God to give me the path to get out of this thing, because he's already showing me engagement rings.
Oh, brother.
And I'm like, I don't even know. No, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And
Yeah.
trying to get out of that. And I prayed and I prayed every night, give me the words, give me the opportunity, give me the courage, give me the strength. And so I was working the steps and I was starting my fourth step. And I used that as the opportunity to say, I've got to end this, that I'm working on my fourth step and I need time alone. This isn't working for me right now. So kind of peace
Mm.
out. And he took it well. He didn't
Wow.
stalk me or anything like that.
Were you able to still go to meetings that he went to, or was that an uncomfortable situation?
No, I did.
How about him? Did he keep going, or did he?
He did. He has since passed away.
Hell of a lesson to learn in your first 6 months, huh?
It really was. But it was an experience that I can share with other people in the program and say, this is how it happens. This is how they prey on you. This is how they get you at your most vulnerable. I can share my strength, my experience, strength, and hope with other women. And okay, so even if you
Yeah.
just disregard our advice and get into this
Uh-huh.
relationship, you can get out. I remember Susie telling me at that first time at that Starbucks before my first meeting, she
Mm-hmm.
saw my mind
Mm-hmm.
working. She read my mind and she goes, Diane, I see what's happening here. If you think you're going to meet your next husband in an AA meeting, just remember these are the men you used to drink with.
They're as sick as you are.
Exactly. Exactly. Just think about those men.
So you broke it off with him, and you mentioned your first 18 months. You mentioned getting involved in your fourth and fifth step. How long had you been sober by the time that you were working those steps and going into the later steps of the program?
Probably took me around 18 months. Yeah. And I did, because when I did my fourth and fifth, after that, we were doing 8 and 9. And I came up with
Mm-hmm.
an amend I needed to make. And my sponsor said, I have never heard of this. Let's go start over on 4 and 5. So I had to kind of revert back and get real thorough.
Wow.
It probably took me 18 months, 20 months to get through the steps.
So during that time, you're still going to regular meetings. Is this the point at which you were starting law school?
Yes, I got my undergrad degree while sober. Then I
Cool.
got into law school and got through law school while I was sober. I did get married when I was sober, and that marriage lasted about 5 years.
It did.
I really do believe he didn't understand alcoholism at all,
Yeah, that's tough.
and did not believe I was one. He was encouraging. I mean, it wasn't like he derided me or
Yeah.
anything, but I think that led to a lot of different issues, and there were stepchildren that were issues, and that's kind of one of those kind of blips on the radar screen to me today.
I get it. Yeah. Well, it's good that you recognize that at the point. And even if somebody is encouraging someone else to go to meetings, that doesn't necessarily mean that they support the entire idea of getting sober, especially if they want some kind of
Right.
control. I get that. And I've heard that from different people. So after that 5-year marriage, how many years sober are we talking about?
Let's see. I was 14 years sober at that point.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So from 14 till 24. So over the next 10 years, what did the next 5 or 10 years look like in your life, specifically related to, raising the kids and going to meetings and staying involved? And did you ever find times at which you were moving away from AA? Can you kind of unpack some of that for us?
Yeah, there was one time when all of the cliches started really rubbing me wrong. It's like,
Really?
stop,
Uh-huh.
stop, stop.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I just muddled through that.
Were you going to fewer meetings at that time, or were you kind of letting up?
Yeah, yeah, I was. I
Uh-huh.
was. And
Yeah.
then I got back involved. I got back into the meetings and developed a new kind of posse that I
Mm-hmm.
really liked, and was single, dated a little bit here and there,
Mm-hmm.
dated someone in the program for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And with each one of those relationships, there was a new lesson for me to learn, right?
Isn't there always?
There's always the lesson, but are we paying attention is the question.
Well, yeah, and are they making any difference in the way we operate next time?
Exactly.
They really help amend our behavior. Now, at this point, did you still have the same woman as your sponsor that you'd had all those years ago?
No, we kind of drifted apart.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real strange sort of thing. I
Mm.
don't formally have a sponsor today. But I
Okay.
have a lot of women that have a lot of experience, strength, and hope in other areas
Mm-hmm.
that I use.
I see. Uh-huh.
I did some intense therapy after Hurricane Harvey.
Mm-hmm.
I did about a year of really intense therapy.
You really got devastated by that storm, didn't you?
I did, and it's emotionally, I was wrecked after
Yeah,
Harvey. My house was damaged extensively,
sure.
but not like my neighbors, right?
Right.
So I had survivor's guilt. Could still live in my house. I got to drive
Mm.
through the wreckage
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over, and it was a lot of trauma.
I'll
And I
bet.
didn't recognize it until the following February. I had gone to a therapy appointment, and I was on my way to the Ash Wednesday service at my church.
Uh-huh.
And I was walking up to the church, and I had a thought that I've never had. And it was like, why am I even bothering?
Huh.
And so this would have been, I was about 18 years sober at this point.
Uh-huh.
Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't thinking of killing myself or anything like that. That wasn't, but it was
Right.
that one thought that, what the hell? What am I doing? Why am I
Yeah.
even bothering?
Yeah, I get
And I
that.
get into church, and the priest at my church is an
Uh-huh.
amazing person.
Oh, yeah.
And he spoke to me that night.
Uh-huh.
I don't know that it was a save my life moment, but it certainly pointed me to a different direction.
Wow. So here you were at the very edge of the abyss, so to speak, emotionally, after surviving what wrecked a lot of people's lives here in Houston. 4 years ago now.
Yeah, it's been 4
Yeah,
years.
as of the date of this interview. So you're at your low point. You're not necessarily thinking about taking a drink, but you're entertaining some other more permanent solutions when you
Mhm.
just happen to be going to church that night and the priest talks to you.
Yes.
Is that safe to say that's another God moment in your life?
It's truly a God moment to this
Uh-huh.
point that I felt compelled to email him and tell him
Wow.
how
Wow.
he struck me that night,
Mm-hmm.
and how important that sermon was to me.
Mm-hmm.
And and they don't get a lot of feedback. It's sort of like
Sure.
lawyers. We
Yeah.
only get feedback when people are pissed.
Right.
But that was a kind of a pivotal moment when you think of those moments in your life when you're going to do a turn or whatever. And I started really, after that point, pulling myself up gently
Mm-hmm.
back into sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids have done so well with their lives,
Mm.
and we went through a lot together.
Sure.
And when their dad passed away in 2012, they both had difficult relationships with him, but they were by his side.
Mhm.
And he
Mhm.
left a mess. He left a mess, believe
Mm.
me. But
Yeah.
nonetheless,
For you to clean up?
uh pick up the pieces of my children's broken hearts one more time.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
get
then he
that.
left a wife who my children refer to as Satan,
Oh, God.
and they
Okay.
had to deal with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that wasn't even of my making. I had,
Right.
but it was always something. And but
Yeah.
so when he passed away, we were all sad and
Mhm.
our hearts were broken,
Mhm.
but it was a relief. We didn't have to worry when the next shoe was going to drop, right? So
Yeah, it's still a tough thing for anybody to go through, much less
yes.
when you're in your late 20s or early 30s.
Yes.
So, after this point at which the priest kind of spiritually intercedes, how did your program from that point on become reflective of that occurrence?
I suppose I was recommitted to everything that has always worked for me. I
Uh-huh.
went back to the basics of meetings, prayer,
Uh-huh.
reaching out,
Uh-huh.
being available.
Yeah.
And yeah, I went back to the basics.
In these interviews, I haven't gone too deep into the professions that people are in, but yours actually involves alcoholism, drug abuse, family,
Right.
domestic situations. At what point in your sobriety did you become passionate about those particular avenues?
When I began to realize, I practice a lot down in the Corpus Christi area,
Yeah.
and down there, every case that I touched involved drugs and alcohol.
Oh my.
I would be maybe one, maybe two didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so as my practice grew,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave me the opportunity to stick my program on people. And it's really a pleasure when they come back and tell me they followed or they remembered my advice or they followed my advice, and they were so
Mm-hmm.
grateful for the experience, my experience, strength, and hope that I've shared with them.
Hmm.
And I do share with them that I'm sober.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
do when it's appropriate,
Yeah.
right? When it's
Yeah. Sure.
appropriate.
Sure.
And so it's been a very powerful part of my program
Mm-hmm.
and part of my profession.
Yeah.
And everybody that they just know that I'm kind of a poster child for all of this, Howard,
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
the legal profession.
Yeah.
And I ran for a position on the board of directors for the state bar. And part of my
Mm-hmm.
platform was we've got to find those people in our profession that need us, the people that know they need help. They're already identified and they're going to be getting the help with us. But we got to find the people that don't know that we're here to help them. We've got to have our hand has to reach out to help lift them up. And it's usually the solo practitioners just trying to crank out a living. We're not
Sure.
all rich and famous, right?
Right. Right.
Um, we're all just like other human beings, just trying to crank out a living when virtually in every case, I think everybody hates us.
Well, and especially when you're talking about, and I've known an awful lot of lawyers over the years, both recovering and not recovering from alcoholism and drug addiction. And I was involved in the organization you're talking about at a statewide level and had the opportunity to interface with some of those people. It occurs to me that one of the biggest challenges faced by people working with actively alcoholic attorneys is that by the time they get found out, the repercussions from what they're doing, especially with so many other in their profession involved in it, that's the only reason they'll do anything about it. They don't necessarily see I'd like to get sober to improve the quality of my life. Instead, it's, I'll get sober to meet whatever.
Keep my license.
To keep my license. Do you find that a lot?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How do you deal with that, though?
Well, you know what? Better late than never, right?
Yeah, I get it. Sure.
So I've served on the grievance panel, and a lot of the grievances are for attorneys not communicating with their client, keeping them reasonably informed, taking their money and all of that stuff.
Right.
So when I was on the grievance panel, I had an eye out for those needing to be intervened upon.
Sure.
And we've sat in meetings with people that have said, Harris County intervened on me, and that's how I got sober. So maybe it's the state bar that intervenes on somebody to get them sober. But I also speak a lot to different attorney organizations about identifying those people who are struggling, the ones that have always dressed well, carry themselves well, are now sloppy, either lost weight, gained weight, disheveled, missing appointments and dates and not responding. And let's find those people and find out what's going on instead of just, being frustrated. Let's see if they need something. Is there something that I can help with?
So once they're already at that point, you get involved. I've asked this question of the other attorneys, so I'll ask it of you just to be fair. What is there about being in the legal profession that seems like there are more lawyers in AA than almost any other profession? What is there about that business that we see a lot of alcoholics?
It's a thankless job a lot of the time.
Really?
They're the people in the big firms. I don't see them as much at risk. I don't see them in meetings as much as I do see the attorneys in the smaller firms.
Yeah.
And it's kind of emotional, you asking me that question. I'm not sure why I'm having an emotional response to it, Howard, but I think it's that we get into cases, we can't change the law, we can't change the facts. And our clients are like, why can't you help me? And we're trying to explain to them, you've already created this little disaster, and I can only do so much to fix it. And consequently, we get yelled at by the client and the family members and the other attorney, and the other party hates us and they're posting shit on Facebook about us. And all we want to do is help our clients.
Yeah.
But there's only so much we can do within the parameters of the law. And so one of our biggest challenges is managing our clients' expectations. Yeah. But when hell rains down on these people, and then they don't get paid, and then they can't pay the bills, and then they take their clients' money, it just adds up. There are deadlines. You don't want to miss the deadlines. I can't lose my license. All of this stuff, it really starts weighing on us, and very, very difficult sometimes when I imagine the solo practitioner who's got one office and they're sitting there trying to meet a deadline 11 o'clock at night with a bottle of scotch.
Yeah.
And they don't know they have a problem yet.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get through. And so I think it's incumbent, and this is my mantra, is to find the attorneys who need us before they know they need us.
Yeah.
Right. And open the conversation with them, talk to them. We have the highest suicide rate of any other profession. We have catapulted dentists. Dentists had the highest rate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Go figure.
Yeah, we don't know that one. Yeah. And, we're up there with pilots and doctors and those people that hold lives in their hands, right?
Yeah, where the expectations are so high that you can't possibly ever reach them. And when you do, you're waiting for a feeling that will wipe out all the other bad feelings. And it's just not that powerful, is it?
Yes. And I had a recent experience where I had just in July, I've been working very, very hard all through June, all through July. And I just felt like the worst lawyer ever. And I called my fiance and I said, he's like, what's wrong? And I just burst into tears. And I said, I'm a horrible lawyer. I feel like a horrible lawyer. I didn't say I am. I said, I feel like a horrible lawyer. I feel like I can't win. I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And, and he talked me off that ledge, and I talked to my associate as well. And, and I just had to, once you share that sort of stuff, and that's what I learned in the program, you're only as sick as your secrets. Once you share it, once you find someone who's safe, who's not going to use it against you, you say the words and you're freeing yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
It's that valve, that release valve on the pressure cooker. So it sounds to me like the legal profession, lawyers, especially those in private or smaller practices, particularly, would benefit from any preventive interventions that might occur, like therapy prior to getting to the point where they need to be intervened on.
Absolutely. And one of the problems we have, and I'm working on this as well, when you apply to take the bar exam, they ask questions about your mental health. And I had to share about, that I was in recovery, which meant I had to go get more letters from other people to say that I was really in recovery. And so you go in with the stigma of addiction and mental health being bad. So people aren't going to openly admit to it because it's bad.
Well, yeah.
And so it becomes a secret. And I'm trying to get the Texas Board of Law Examiners to rethink that question on the application.
That's a tough one, though, right?
Yeah. If they're not going to just change it because Diane thinks they should change it. But
well, so some of the issues have been that should there competition, and in a court case, should the other side find out something that they can use against the lawyer personally, that's got to be much easier to do when a question just exposes it for the world.
Sure. For me, I love it when attorneys will call me up and tell me how bad my client is because they got a DWI or something like that. And I'm like, really? You think that? And then I go in, I tell a little bit of my story.
Yeah.
The judges know my story. So a lot of those tactics fall on deaf ears with me. But there are attorneys in the world. The civil attorneys are brutal and personal. And so the one advantage I have being open about being sober, it doesn't matter, because I would say every single judge that sits on a civil or family court bench or a probate court bench knows today that Diane is sober. So what? Next question.
So they know you're sober. Do they know how you're sober? Did you acknowledge your involvement with AA?
Yeah. I don't hide it.
Yeah. There's no reason to. If, we talk about anonymity, I've been very upfront with people over the years about my participation because it's a big part of my life.
It's a very big part of my life.
If I'm doing a good enough job staying sober, then that probably means I'm doing a reasonably good job within the program of AA. And there's nothing in any of the literature, especially the early literature, which said that we shouldn't talk about AA and that we shouldn't talk about how effective it can be for people who really want it. But we have to talk from our own experience about it. So what you're saying then is these judges know when someone comes before them and they get ready to sentence them.
Yes.
They know what to realistically expect when they sentence somebody to have a certain number of AA meetings a week. Do they know more about this now because of you?
Well, I only do the family law stuff, right?
Okay, right.
So I gave up criminal law a long time ago, but they give them the opportunity. Yeah. One of the things that you and I tried to do with educating the judges downtown was to say, hey, you can do evaluations all day long.
Right.
And then you can give somebody supervised visits, but how do we help them going forward?
Right.
And so, we gave them that opportunity. And so that's what I work on my cases, and that's what people call me to help them work on their cases. And I am of the school that you can get sober in other places than AA. There are people that can do it in church or through other programs or through other ministries or group therapy or something like that. And so I tell people this is what I do, and this is what obviously millions and millions and millions have done. If somebody's like, well, I'm going to do the church thing, I'm like, okay, the door is always open over here if you want to go to a meeting.
I, over the years, have told you that if you ever run into a man who you feel who reaches out or reaches back to you saying, I think I'd like to try this AA thing, and you want to connect him with someone who can meet him at a meeting, you know that I'm one of those people, and you've known that for a long time. And there are other men and women in the program who are willing to be that resource, so that AA is not an abstract concept.
Exactly.
Even when they're sentenced to go to a certain number of meetings to get their paper signed.
Right.
There are plenty of people today with years and decades of sobriety who were paper signers, who were amongst that crowd, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's why I just try it. Give it a shot. Give it a try. Give it a shot. It's really interesting. We know the percentages are bad. The percentages are not in favor of long-term sobriety, right? But I have to be the example. I have to be the one that answers the phone. And I've set myself up for this and willingly. I'm the one that has to answer the messages on Facebook. I need help. How do I get it? I'm the one that has to take the phone calls from the recovery centers when attorneys call me. Well, if I'm going to be out there like I am, I better set the example.
You are really one heck of a great example.
Thank you.
I've been sitting here for the last almost hour and a half looking at your headshot, and you've got this beautiful smile. And so I'm thinking, you must be all right where you're at. And it sounds like you are. It sounds like a passion to me, and a pretty meaningful thing to do with your sobriety, which to me, the biggest question we have to answer for ourselves in AA is, okay, I'm sober, now what? How am I going to take this out?
Yes.
And my desire to do these interviews and also do the Big Book podcast was, if one person, one place in the world gets helped by this, then it's all worthwhile.
Yes, that's how I feel. Mm-hmm. If one person gets sober because I told them to, or I suggested, or I led the example, my life was worth living.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that in your attitude, and that in your day-to-day being as a person, as a recovering woman in Alcoholics Anonymous. That means the world, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Sounds like your gifts have been coming along the way. Your God moments have been occurring.
Yes.
Can you give me an idea of your serenity level today?
Today, I am on a 1 to 10, probably a nice 9.
Good for you. I'd like to think that this interview contributed to that a little bit, Diane. And
it did. I like this.
This has been remarkable, just sit down and talk to you and get to know you better. I mean, I've heard you share in meetings over the years, but and there's so many things that just need to be heard in context to really be believed and meaningful. And you've done all that today. I love you. You're just one of my favorite people in the program. And I'm glad
you are as well.
I'm glad that you were able to do this today. I think it's going to make a big difference for a lot of people. And once it's out and people hear it, especially as they hear it along with some of the other attorneys, I think they'll have a little bit different level of understanding and respect.
I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love that, Howard. Thank you for asking me. This has been such an honor and a pleasure.
Well, thank you. You've done a remarkable and extraordinary job. Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? It's another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.